Welcome to Lowndes Legal Talk, where we share perspectives on legal and business issues affecting you.
Hello, I'm Greg McNeill. I am the litigation department chair at the Lowndes Law Firm, and I'm joined today with our most experienced trial attorney, Terry Young. We're actually recording this on the eve of the November election, so we don't know the results as we're speaking today. But if you believe what you read in the media, both sides, both the Republican campaigns and Democratic campaigns, have engaged platoons of lawyers pending the results of the election. And in Florida, if that feels like deja vu, it's because it is. Many law firms got involved 20 years ago in what we call the Florida Election 2000 litigation. And our firm was one of those who kind of waded into the disputes. Terry, you were the attorney here at Lowndes who was first contacted back in 2000, in early November 2000, about being involved with the election litigation. How did that come about, and what we call the Seminole County absentee ballot case, and what was the issue in that case?
What came about, I happened to be at my desk late Wednesday evening before Thanksgiving, and I got a call from a lawyer at another law firm who decided that this was too hot of a political football to handle. And so they wanted to get out of the case. They had already made an appearance in the case, and they were looking for someone to take over the case. I'm confident that I am not the first person they called, but I was the last person. And we agreed to get involved in the case, substitute in, and it began as a whirlwind ride. The next Friday, immediately following Thanksgiving, we were reviewing pleadings, getting ready for a hearing, for the case, which at that time was in Seminole County. The case ultimately got transferred to Leon County because any election cases venue must occur in Leon County in Tallahassee, Florida. The issue in that case was a very narrow issue, but very interesting. It had to do with whether or not absentee ballot applications or request forms were legally altered or not, and affected the ballot that was actually cast. And that was the limited issue. The facts behind it was that both parties typically have absentee ballot request forms printed by a printer and sent out to the electorate. Supposedly, the name and voter registration number are to be on the forms. Some of the Republican printers failed to put numbers on all of the forms. The Republicans found out about that shortly before the election. They approached the Seminole County Supervisor of Elections office and wanted to correct that. She allowed that to occur under her supervision and direction. And then those ballots were mailed out to the electorate, and the electorate filled out their ballot, put it in the signed sealed envelope, and mailed it back in. And to the extent that that ballot was received, it was to be counted. What the goal of the plaintiff in that case was to have all absentee ballots in the county of Seminole County, thrown out because of what they considered to be an irregularity.
Right. And for people who may not recall, but when Bush was elected president in Florida, actually elected president, but in Florida, he carried the state by 537 votes. And in Seminole County, as I recall, there were about 15,000 ballots that were at issue in the Seminole County absentee ballot case. So clearly, if the court had determined that those ballots could not be counted, it would have impacted the results in Florida, which would have resulted in Al Gore being elected president. So it was clearly an important case. I recall when we were in Tallahassee trying the case, it was a bit of a whirlwind. My recollections is that it was incredibly chaotic, to put it mildly, that when we were in the courtroom, rather than having 6 jurors in a jury box, we had cameras from ABC and CBS, NBC, CNN, reporters from the New York Times, Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, just about every major national newspaper was there. And it was a packed courtroom, and the media was wall to wall in the courtroom and spilled out into the halls. So it was a wild and chaotic time. What do you recall most vividly about the trial?
Well, I do recall all of that, and I do recall that as you point out, the absentee ballot votes in Seminole County were critical. While at the same time, and you could read about it today in the paper, down in Palm Beach County, they were dealing with hanging chads and dimpled chads, and those amounted to hundreds of votes. This was a 5,000 vote swing at a minimum. If this case had gone the other way, they wouldn't have been talking about the hanging chads. And I remember walking into the courtroom that day. First of all, I remember walking to the courthouse, and there were news tents set up everywhere, interviews going on, because there was more than our case going on. There was a similar case of ours involving Martin County. There were other cases having to do with Palm Beach County. There were cases going on in federal court on whether or not the military votes or ballots were going to be cast. In fact, at one point, I had to go from one courthouse to the other to make an argument. But I remember as I walked into the courtroom, there, as you said, the news media was in the jury box to the left. The judge was on the bench, and there were lawyers everywhere, and the entire audience behind the bar was completely filled up with everyone, including Jesse Jackson.
Right. Yeah, that's a great recollection. I'd forgotten that, but you're right. He was there, and every time we went in and out of the courthouse on a break, we were swamped by media asking questions and wanting to know thoughts about it. And obviously, as lawyers, we try to stay out of the newspaper. Doesn't really do our clients any good. Ultimately, the court determined that there was no intentional misconduct in the handling of the absentee ballots in Seminole County. And so therefore the ballots were counted. As you point out, that was a significant number and ultimately ensured the victory for George Bush at the time. But that case, and I'm sure you've probably never had a case like it. Maybe we'll never have another one like it, but it was a case that went from the filing of a complaint in early November to a decision by the Florida Supreme Court in mid-December, about 6 weeks later. And besides you and me, we had other attorneys here at the firm, Jim Toscano, Rachel Cabady, who were helping and were involved in the case. But given the time pressure, the incredible time pressure that we were under, how did you coordinate? How did you manage? How were you able to deal with the discovery and pleadings and getting this thing to trial in such a short period of time?
Well, the moment we got involved, of course, it was on a compressed trial schedule. Ordinarily, cases take years to get to trial. And we went to trial from the time the complaint was filed. We actually tried the case on December 7th and December 9th. And then from our perspective, it was over other than the appeal. We were involved in the appeals, and they were lickety split because immediately upon the rendition of Judge Nikki Clark's decision, it was appealed to the first DCA. The first DCA immediately transferred it to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court immediately entered an order that briefs had to be due on Monday. So it was around the clock. And we did have a large team. And I remember we loaded everybody up on an airplane. We flew to Tallahassee. We shipped printers up so we could work all night and work in a room with printers and typewriters. We didn't have computers then like we have iPads and things like that. So it was a little more difficult back in 2000. But we managed. And of course, one of the problems we had was logistics. With what was so much was going on, there weren't a lot of hotel rooms. So we were relegated to a Holiday Inn Express. So we got smart. I could credit that to the victory.
Yes, I remember the Holiday Inn Express quite well. We were a little late to the game getting our reservations in Tallahassee. So you, at that point, you took what you could get. One of the results of the 2000 election litigation is that Florida has now adopted a number of election reforms and a different statutory framework by which to measure electoral issues. But the issue this time may end up being mail-in ballots and absentee ballots because a number of issues. One is the time by which the ballots have to be received. There has been some claim that mail-in ballots open themselves up to potential fraud. And in Florida, this time around in 2020, 5.8 million Floridians have requested mail-in ballots. And what we know historically is about 1% of mail-in ballots are rejected because they're either missing a signature or they're not able to match the signature with what they have on record. So that's 58,000 votes, which we would anticipate would be rejected again. And obviously in a very tight election, that's a critical issue. So the stakes in 2020 feel even higher than they were in 2000. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's going to be a very close election. 2000 was close. This is expected to be closer, irrespective of what you hear. Every time you hear a poll, it's different as it relates to the number. And it's going to come down to some of the critical battleground states: Texas, Pennsylvania, Florida, North Carolina. And all of those have different laws about when absentee ballots can be received. I think uniformly they have to be postmarked by the date of the election, but they can be received in some states. They must be received by the date of the election. Some states 3 days, some days 10 days. And it's going to be rife with issues. You have poll watchers watching what they call canvassing committees. These are the committees that match up the signatures to see whether or not they're doing it right. There are going to be a lot of entry points for all kinds of litigation over all sorts of issues if this is a close election in certain states.
Thanks, Terry. It's hard to believe that it's been 20 years, and hopefully we won't have a repeat of 2000 this year, but you never know. Any final thoughts about any of this?
Only that I think that what happened in 2000 in Florida created an entire revamping by the Supervisor of Elections in almost virtually every single county, and additional laws that, at least in Florida, will make the casting of the ballots and the counting of the ballots that much easier. The mail-in voting, that's a new thing. In Florida, we don't have mail-in voting except by absentee ballot requests, not just U.S. mail. And so that will not be as big an issue as it may be in certain states as it is in Florida. We certainly don't have drive-in voting, which is a big issue in Texas right now. It's going to be resolved by a federal court judge today.
Well, that's about all the time we have. I want to thank Terry for joining me today. Thank you all for taking the time to watch. And as I said, this is being recorded on November 2nd, so we don't know the results, but whether or not your candidate ultimately was successful, thank you for exercising your right to vote.
Thank you for joining us for Lowndes Legal Talk. For more information about today's topic or to learn more about our attorneys and practices, please visit lowndes-law.com.